So thank you very much for being here today, Matt. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Nice. Your trip to London been all right so far?
Yeah, pretty much. It's my second time here and kind of enjoying some of the culture.
Nice, good. Well, thank you very much for being here today. So to kick things off, it would be fantastic if you could introduce yourself and your previous career history in Salesforce.
Sure. So my name's Matt Meyers, and I've been doing Salesforce for about 18 plus years now. And I pretty much started as a Salesforce developer, worked my way all up to architect, and now I do a number of things, which including running a software service company doing virus scanning for Salesforce. I also have my own Instagram channel helping elevate architects and educate them to help them advance their career from basically developer, admins, and architects alike, and all the way to architect, and hopefully eventually help them get their CTA.
Nice, thank you. And what's your YouTube channel called?
It's an Instagram channel, and it's Matt Meyers CTA. That's how you can find me.
Nice, straight to the point. So we're here today to mainly talk about a CTA or Certified Technical Architect, of which you are one of them, a very rare breed in the Salesforce ecosystem. So could you give us an overview of what a CTA actually is?
A way I can explain it to people that are non-Salesforce people that don't really understand it, it's kind of the PhD of Salesforce. You have to study a lot like a PhD. I spent at least 2 years, just 2 years alone studying purely for the CTA, and then once you're ready to take the exam, it's just like similar to a PhD where you have to do defense. You have to do a scenario that in front of a panel of 4 judges, and that is really your exam. It takes quite a long time for the exam as well, so it's very, very well respected. Additionally, I think the CTAs in the Salesforce ecosystem, for those that understand it or know it, is revered one of the pinnacle of someone's Salesforce career in a lot of ways, because there's so few people that have it. Last I heard, it's about 550 people in total that have the CTA. So.
Wow, yeah, that is amazing. And yeah, I think 5 years ago or something, I heard there was between 100 and 200. So, the number doesn't grow massively, it's still relatively small.
Exactly. Actually, believe it or not, it's accelerated a lot just because there's a lot more resources that used to be out there than used to. I think last I met, there only about a year and a half ago, maybe only 2 years ago, there was only 200 or so.
Wow.
And then it just skyrocketed to 550 because there's so many more resources out there for CTA.
Yeah, and I think, so when did you pass your CTA exam?
I don't remember. It's been so long ago. I just know my number. I believe I'm 87 of the 550. Nice. And the CTA's changed quite a bit since I took it. So
I mean, it would make sense that it's accelerated now, because I think Salesforce came out with the pyramid a few years ago, where you achieve the system architect, the application architect, and then those are the prerequisites to take the CTA. Right.
Yes, exactly. And that actually didn't even exist when I got my CTA. So, a funny little side story. I was in Paris last week for the first ever Year Architecting conference. It was purely for Salesforce architects to get together instead of admins or developers. So there's really never been an architect conference. And so they asked, would all the people that have their application architects stand up? Would everyone have their system architects stand up? And so I stood up for one of them, and then they said system architects, and then I sat down, and then the CTA, I stood back up again. And everyone was like, what's good? Because I'm the only one in the room that didn't have to take those exams, except for I want to start taking them now myself, just so I can have that experience, because it helps me be a better coach to people as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's having this kind of formalized structure, because you're taking, to achieve system and application architect, you're taking kind of normal Salesforce certs, some of the architect certs.
Yeah, exactly. And I can give you a little bit of the history of why that happened. So back when I was taking it, most people took it twice or more to pass the exam. So Salesforce found that most people were not ready. And also there was a huge jump between advanced admin or develop platform, even platform developer 2, to get to CTA. So they wanted to have some stepping stones that prepared you for the CTA. So each one of those other exams are kind of preparing you for each of what they would call the core competencies of the CTA. And then that's kind of your starting point, that you know that you're starting to get ready for the CTA, but you're not exactly ready yet. And a lot of the study groups for CTA won't even take you if you don't have your application and system architect, because they want to make sure that you're at least ready for that next level of learning, that if you've made it through all those certifications.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you. And so you've touched on kind of the core part of the CTA exam, which is a panel interview with how many? 3 judges?
4 typally.
4 judges.
All CTAs.
Who are all CTAs, yeah. So, pretty intimidating, I can imagine.
Very much so.
Could you give us a bit more insight into what that process is actually like?
Yeah, sure. So the test has changed quite a bit since I originally took it. So talk about first when I took it, there was 3 steps to your test. The first step you did a self-evaluation, then you took a physical exam, and then you went to the board exam and walked through that process. And then even the board exam in front of the 4 judges was a lot different, because when I took it, you had 2 parts of the board exam. One was a scenario that you took where you had 45 minutes to build out a whole solution. And then I believe another 40 minutes to present. The judges had another 40 minutes to do a Q&A session. Then you also had a second part where you presented an actual story of a real, like a presentation or scenario that you've done where you personally had a client. But what we found, in myself even as a judge, a lot of people would come with things that were not real, or they would fabricate things, and I think it just wasn't a good test of what people knew for an exam, bringing something from the outside in. And so what they did is they changed the exam, so it was a single scenario that those components they were testing you on for the third party or your personal experience presentation, they brought into the core presentation. And they also extended the time from, it used to be 45 minutes you had to prepare, and now it's 3 hours. But the scenario is a lot longer. It used to be 4 pages long. Now I think it's a good 8 pages or so long. And so kind of what, as you're going through that, the experiences, they put you in a room, give you this scenario, you have a whiteboard or sometimes a laptop that doesn't have internet access, just with PowerPoint. Just like every other exam, take your cell phone away and then you can take notes. It's all offline, and then you have to read through it, you have to understand the scenario and build a end-to-end solution. And that's those 3 hours. Then you have another 40 minutes or so where you go up and you present to the judges, and then when you're done presenting, the judges have another 40 minutes to do a Q&A session with you. And the thing is, if the judges can't get the answers they need in that 40 minutes, that's it.
Yeah. But
that's kind of the general experience of the board exam.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Sounds intense. So for a lot of people out there in the Salesforce ecosystem, they see CTA as kind of their ultimate goal. It's obviously very well respected to be a CTA. You can obviously hope for salary increases and massive job opportunities and things like that. But what would you say are some requirements of someone? There's a certain amount of years that you should work in the ecosystem, certain projects that you should have worked on. How does that kind of work?
Sure. So if you go to a Trailhead site with certification, Salesforce has their own idea of what that would be, and I think they see something like 5 years of implementation experience, so many years as, I think 3 years in an architect role and so forth. So that's about 8 years or so Salesforce recommends. Personally, I've done this for a very long time, as I mentioned, 18 years. I think at least 10 years experience, in my personal opinion, of Salesforce. And I think the 3 or so or longer of an architect. For me, 3 years is you're just kind of bridge the surface of an architect. You're just getting started. So I think that would be your baseline. And then, but not saying that someone couldn't do it. It just might be a little bit difficult if you don't have that real world experience under your belt.
Yeah, that makes total
Yeah.
sense.
I guess the second part, just from experience-wise, there's some other pieces that I personally feel that, and also I've heard some other talks recently from Melissa Shepard and even Gemma Blizzard have been talking about certain things that they feel that what a CTA is. And some of it is also the soft skills. Even communication is actually even a part of the CTA now. Wasn't really as strong. So from communication standpoint, they want to make sure that you can have good presentation skills. That's where I see a lot of people fall down on their CTA just because they may know the content, but they can't present. You need to have good negotiation skills. You need to be able to convince your customer that your solution, your recommended solution, is the right one. You need to be able to identify what the pros and cons. There's 10 ways to do something, or lots of ways to do something in Salesforce, but it's really what's the best way for that customer. And it may not be the perfect solution is the best for that customer, because you have to consider other things like timelines, budget, how long are they need the solution for? Do they need it for a year, or do they need it to last 10 years? You have to think of other external factors. What other environments do you have to connect to? What other business politics are there to deal with? So I think there's a lot of things. So you have to almost be this higher level architect rather than a TA. A normal TA would be at the project level. A CTA is more at the program level. You're driving the entire program of that enterprise, not just a specific project.
Yeah, no, great. And I think that's such an important point, because you would maybe stereotype the CTA role as the most technical role, and you'd be right. But there's so many more skills that you do have to do, like communication skills. And I'm sure in the Q&A, they're really testing your ability to defend your own solutions.
Exactly. And you just brought up a very great point as well. Salesforce itself is trying to even push admins to go down the CTA track. You see, Salesforce is pushing this as saying that you don't need to be a developer to be a CTA. And I firmly believe that too. You need to understand what's possible from the development capability to be able to recommend the right solutions, understand the limitations, pros and cons, but you do not necessarily need to be an actual developer to get your CTA. And I do know several people that I used to work with when I was at Salesforce that have gotten their CTA that were solution architects that were not developers, but they were able to get their CTA. So I would say to any admin out there, you have the ability to get a CTA. Don't make that fact that you think that you need to be a developer scare you away from trying to get your CTA.
Yeah, no, very, very valid point. So for those out there that might want to look at a CTA as a potential path, what tips would you have for them? And I believe you're a judge on quite a few panels, right, of these CTA.
Yeah,
CTA
I judged a number of times, and I actually would say that being a judge in some ways was harder than being a participant. I think we were talking before, I failed my CTA the first time because there were no study materials at all. But then the second time I passed it was easy for me. And I think the reason why it was, from the studying perspective for the CTA, was because first off, I went all in. I looked at each of the pieces that need to be done. I clicked on every single thing. I watched every YouTube. I read every single manual. Funny enough, I even went to your site a number of times and looked at a lot of the material that you had to give me ideas of where else I should be studying. I sought out the experts. I found people that were experts in various of the core competencies of the CTA, and got help from them to help clarify, especially even other CTAs that were teaching me that I found as mentors. And I think that's really what made me the CTA. That's one of the other things I tell everyone is, you also have to really want it. You, just like anything, if some people say, okay, I'm just kind of studying, I'm kind of wanting it, but you have to give it all in. You have to give up some of those things that I didn't go to movies, I didn't see my friends as much, I didn't even sometimes see my family, which was probably not great, but it's only a point in time. And so it's just like anything, like a marathon runner. Do they train all the time? Yes, that's how they were able to pass the marathon. So CTA is a marathon; it's not a sprint. You will be doing lots of long hours, learning. It's really, you need to conceptualize it, not memorize it. You will not pass it if you're just trying to conceptualize the material.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No. Thanks a lot for that. And for someone that's maybe starting out in their Salesforce career, 1-2 years, very ambitious, here's about CTA, has that as the goal. What advice would you give for that kind of person who is, years away from taking the CTA but needs to build up very good foundational skills?
Yeah, that's kind of a hard one in a way, but I think there's a lot of resources that exist nowadays. I would start out, if I'm just getting started, I would start out in Trailhead first. I would go to Trailhead to take all the core foundational courses, the admin, intermediate admin, expert admin, then go on to some of the non-coding developer tracks, and then some of the specialized tracks. And I think that it's just gives you that foundation for growing it, but then I think nothing substitutes hands-on experience as well. That's what I did when I first got started. I was clicking around everything, trying to see what does this do. But the best way, really, I would say, is don't try to take it all at once. Break it look at the modules. Look at learn opportunity, learn case, learn the service console, learn leads. All those different applications. Don't just try to learn everything all at once, because it's going to be a little bbit too inundating. And then the same thing from the CTA. Find mentors. Find people that can teach you. There's a lot of resources out there. Connect with the community. And then that will help accelerate your learning. Don't try to learn it by yourself, because that will take you much longer than if you learn from somebody who already knows it.
Yeah, and I like the advice, if you're maybe just starting out, don't try and cram too much, because the cramming will come when you have to pass that CTA. So
exactly.
Maybe take it in
there's
steps.
a point where your mind shuts down, so you need to take a break, rest, relax, reset, and then start over again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like little sprints.
Yeah.
Kind of
So Matt, you failed on the first time, but then found it very easy on the second time. So how did you make that switch? What did you change up the second time?
Sure. So the first time I felt like I was inches away from passing. And the first thing I tell everyone always is, if you just barely pass a certification, CTA or anything, did you really pass it? You really didn't conceptualize the materials. The certifications in Salesforce should be a milestone, not a checkbox.
Yeah.
It should be telling you that you know that material, you've conceptualized the material. So I'm very glad I failed it the first time, because I learned a lot from that failure as well, and I realized that I was not exactly ready. So I went back, hit the books, watched the videos again, but most importantly, I found the reason I struggled was how I put everything together. I was struggling to structure it all. And I found, even as a judge, the candidates I found easiest to understand what they were telling me is the ones that could tell a good story. And that's really where I came up with my own methodology, where I would first look at the requirements, look at the document that they put in front of me for the whole solution. So what I did is I started coming up with I would look at the document, and I started drawing out workflows, because the main component, there are two major components of the exam for scoring. The first part is making sure you got all the requirements, and the second part is you got the design. So if you get all the requirements out and you have a workflow, you have the story, then everything else comes together. Then I start, and that's also thinking of it as from a business perspective. When you're dealing with your client, that's where you start, is what is the problem they're trying to solve? And also, what are all the roles? So I would have a workflow per role, per actor. So maybe the support manager, the sales director, or whoever it is. And then everything starts coming together. Then you would get your data model. Then you'll get your role hierarchy. Then you'll understand what are all the systems and licenses involved. So you'll have your system diagram on that. And then you'll throw together your single sign-on, and then at the end you have everything else, like your large data volume and your change management and all that's together. But if you can't tell that good story, then the judges are going to get lost, because the judges have 40 different boxes they need to fill in, and if you can't tell them the good story and they can't follow what you're doing, then the judges will struggle to understand that you actually know the content, where you might, you're just not telling them what they need to hear. Another thing I would tell you about the judges is a lot of people think the judges are trying to fail you. They're actually trying to pass you. So when judges start asking you questions, it means that they don't have enough information, or maybe you're going down the wrong path. So you need to make sure that if you hear them asking a lot of questions, stop and think and say, what is it that they're trying to ask me? And then you can respond a little better. And the last piece of advice I would say is don't open doors for the judges. I hear a lot of people, when we talk about large data volume, for example, say, oh, I'll use skinny tables. And I say, great, what are skinny tables? And then people stop. So unless don't recommend a solution or an app exchange app or something, if you don't know enough to explain about it, just give just enough information that will give the judges what they need to make that determination without giving them too much information that's going to make them want to dig deeper.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, Matt, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for coming down and coming to speak to us. I'm sure so many people out there are going to, glean so much information from this, and all the budding CTAs out there. So do you have any final words for the audience at all?
I mean, not really. I just say it's been a pleasure to meet you in person and have this discussion. And I would say that if anybody has any questions about it, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has offline, and I'm sure you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks.
Cheers.